Howdy, all. Yeah, thanks for being here. We get a short hour together today, and I'm jealous for your time. If you've been to any of my webcasts before, you're probably aware that I'm going to try my best to squeeze 2 hours of content into 1 hour. I'm going to leave you with some resources, some additional opportunities to review, a GitHub repo, et cetera, et cetera. So let's dive in and make the most of our time together. I confessed before we started that in some ways, I don't want to be here talking about business email compromise today. At the same time, it is such a prevalent and growing issue that we need to address it. We need to talk about it. I want to win this one. And as I mentioned moments ago, even if it does sound cliche and trite, it's accurate, it's honest. I want to stop the threat actors in their track. I worked with a very small startup company, 5-6 employees, dedicating countless hours, been in business for just about 2 years, turning a corner into profitability. $125,000 was lost directly into threat actor bank account because of business email compromise, and it almost destroyed the business. They almost lost. That, well, to be frank, it pisses me off. And personally, just me, not talking even about the overarching BHIS DFIR team, I have seen over $10 million directly deposited into threat actor bank accounts in the last year or so from BEC cases that I've worked, just me. And so sadly, this is important. It's critical, and it will not surprise any of you that this is just an introductory component to electronic communications. I mean, you know the deep fakes, the advancement in AI, the advancement in deceptive technologies. This is the beginning of this conversation, I'm afraid, not the end. So let's talk about it today. Let's talk about the implications. I want to talk to you about the current state of affairs effectively and what we're seeing in the wild. Talk about some detection, prevention, investigative opportunities, give you a few additional resources, and cram that all into an hour. It'll be fine. Hi, I'm Patterson Cake. I am a digital forensics and incident response consultant for Black Hills Information Security. I've been doing IR, focusing on IR for the last several years. And again, just excited to be here today to talk to you about what we've seen specifically as it relates to BEC. I'm going to focus mostly on M365 BEC because that's frankly the most prevalent enterprise mail solution system that we're encountering at the moment. The overarching SOPs, standard operating procedures, will apply whether you're using Gmail, on-site email, et cetera, et cetera. I love this quote. This motivates me. Knowing what I know, knowing what I don't know, it sounds a lot like humility to me. And again, I'm humbled and grateful that you're here today to listen to me rant and rave about BEC. One of the things that I do, frankly, on a continuum, is try and take something that's really complicated and simplify it. And I pretend like I'm doing it for your benefit, to be frank. The fact is I'm doing it for my own benefit because I'm just not that smart. I want things to be simple. I strive for simple, effective, and repeatable. That is my mantra for IR, simple, effective, and repeatable. And so this is my view of the world. From my perspective, we can effectively consolidate all threat vectors, all attack vectors, the way that threat actors are going to come at us into these 3 high-level categories. And yeah, there are a few exceptions, but these are the big ones. The unpatched vulnerabilities, AKA 0 days, et cetera, misconfiguration issues, and then identity and credential attacks. And primarily today, we're talking about identity and credential attacks as it pertains to business email compromise, BEC. It's a rare moment in history. A lot of the annual reports have come in, the Verizon DBRs, the Cisco's, the IBM X-Force, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And surprisingly, or maybe unsurprisingly, there's a high degree of agreement in this top line item. And that is that in the last year or so, 9 out of 10, sometimes slightly more than 9 out of 10, which is darn near all of the breaches that occur, start with some sort of phishing. They're starting with some sort of credentialed attack. And again, That's why we're here today talking about this. This is preeminent. It's not new and sexy. I was talking to a customer yesterday, and they're like, tell me about the cool new things that you're encountering in incident response this year. And I'm like, I'm not. It's the same stuff that we encountered last year, sadly, the year before, and the year before. And I would love for us to overcome that. I'd love to be talking about something new and different, frankly. I mentioned just a moment ago, if you've ever gone in search of truth on the internet, anyone? It doesn't matter what the truth is. Best pizza, best mechanic, best wireless router, it doesn't matter. Finding truth is really hard. And so I tend to fall back in the face of incident response exposés, what's going on in the wild. Again, to be honest, I fall back on what I have experienced firsthand, and I don't know that it's statistically relevant. Frankly, I know it's not. At the same time, as mentioned, I have seen $10 million direct deposit into threat actor bank accounts in the last several months. And so this is legit. And for better or for worse, I'm seeing this happen largely in the small to medium business market. So this is, these are companies that have 5, 10, 20, 50 employees. And so we start talking about hundreds of thousands or maybe even millions of dollars. And this is hugely impactful, hugely impactful. That's what I mean about the wild. And frankly, again, what I'm saying is what I have experienced, what we have experienced. And I know that it's true, finite but accurate. So I want to talk about SOPs because I'm thankful the threat actors often follow sort of a series of events, a series of chained events, standard operating procedure, which helps us to know, identify, investigate what we're seeing and what we're experiencing. Talk a little bit about the tactics and techniques. And then again, we'll transition to opportunities for detect, prevent, and some investigative opportunities along the way. How does this begin? How does this happen? And this, again, this won't surprise any of you. This is the beginning of the end, oftentimes. This is actually based on a true story, if you will. And you'll recognize immediately common features, functions of a typical phishing email. The thing that is most crucial about this and what we are seeing recently as the trend is that this message is going to originate from someone that you know. It's going to originate from someone that you do business with. We'll talk about that progression momentarily, but when you get this mail message, the fact is that you recognize this person, at least tangentially. You're busy. Part of your job is to open and respond to email, pay invoices, click links. That's what you do. You're an accounts receivable, accounts payable, HR, et cetera, et cetera. You do this 100, 200 times a day. You don't pay attention. You don't hover over links. That's ridiculous, especially when you recognize this is somebody I know. I trust this project management site. They've done work for us in the past. Immediately triggers that initial emotional response. In this case, it's trust. It's trust. That is the emotional response trigger of the day, is I trust this person, this sender, and then we're done. That's it. The brain kicks in, workflow kicks in, and away we go. And frankly, bad things usually happen. And not surprising, we know that phishing is often intended to trigger an emotional response, whether it's fear, urgency, anger, et cetera. Again, what we're seeing now is I know this person, I trust this person. This particular example, it was actually a ticket warning to an individual, and it wasn't City of Bremerton as this illustrates. It was the Isle of Man. And I'm like, wow, that's fascinating. This person must be well traveled. And I actually spoke to the individual. I'm like, God, when did you go to the Isle of Man? And well, I've never been there. So why did you click on a link for a traffic violation to a place you've never been? Again, this won't shock any of you. The emotional response was triggered. She was fearful. She clicked the link. The rest is history. Again, emotional response at this point, what we're seeing is trust. And this is a hard one. We have been attempting to teach and educate our users for many, many moons now. The first question is, do you recognize the sender? Is this a mail message that you're expecting? That is no longer individually, discreetly a valid criteria, to be honest. Now, as a technician, IT security professional, there are multiple things here you should be worried about. If we could really teach the individuals to hover over links and look at domains and et cetera, frankly, I've given up on that. I don't think it's fair to them. As IT security professionals, we should stop this stuff from ending up in their inbox in the first place and not blame them for responding to an email that we allowed to get in their inbox. Entirely different discussion, but. So what happens next? Trigger a trust response. Whatever happens next, I've already made a decision. This is legit. I need to access this for the purpose of doing my job. Whatever comes next, frankly, how many times I have to click, how many times I have to authenticate, how many times I have to go through warnings. I trust the sender. This is important to me. I will get to the bottom of this message, click the link. On the back end, on the threat actor side, this is just one example. I'm going to be using EvilJinx in the back end, so to speak, to illustrate this. And so user clicks the link. This is step 2 in typical BEC compromise. Again, not surprising, not revelatory, not new, fancy, exciting. EvilJinx has been around for a long time. EvilJinx is an evil proxy, effectively man in the middle. Click the link. In this scenario, and in the most common attack scenarios that we're seeing right now, this is called a lure, appropriately. And in this example, you can see login.haventac is the lure that I created for this demonstration. We could make that more clever. We could make it look more like the legitimate Microsoft Online URL. Frankly, probably doesn't matter. We will generally use a relatively long-standing URL so that this is not easily triggered, easily blocked, etc. Click the link. Link directs the user to a fake Outlook M365 login. Looks a little bit like this, which looks very much like the real login page. IT security professionals were like, look, it says HavenTac. That doesn't look right. I think that's an unreasonable expectation potentially for our users. Should we have let them go to this URL in the first place? We'll talk about that in a minute. The user is convinced this is from a trustworthy sender. They're going to authenticate. Why wouldn't they? Looks pretty legit. It's a well-crafted page. In fact, one of these is real and one of these is not. If you're a typical user, pretty good fake, I would say. The only immediate telltale sign, again, is the URL. And let's face it, this is a stupid URL. If I were a typical user and I'm logging into my webmail, does login.microsoftonline.common/OAuth? That's definitely the JET. I mean, this is, pick on Microsoft. Maybe there's a better way. Maybe this could be a little bit more descriptive. Whatever. Again, this is just, the point being, this is, I think, an unreasonable designator for this typical end user. Not trying to dissuade you from encouraging your users to look at the URLs, but that's extremely challenging. A brief aside, because we're going to talk about this moving forward. What makes you in the context of your email solution? What makes you uniquely identifiable in M365? And the answer is, for identity and access management, your username and your password combination. As a typical human being, you have a standard device browser configuration. You use a PC, you use a Mac, you use an Android, you use an iPhone, you use Safari, Firefox, Chrome. You probably don't switch device platforms and browsers all day, every day, intermittently. Now, you're a bunch of nerds, so maybe you do, but the typical user does not. They standardize on a platform. Most enterprises standardize on a platform. So that's the device browser component. We'll see that represented as the user agent. That's the actual technical component that the browser sends to the server to say, here I am, and here are my capabilities. The third thing is, your MFA. Hopefully you're using MFA. I'm a huge proponent of MFA. It is not a silver bullet for this solution, but it is a component of your identity. MFA is tied to a device, typically, again, Android, iPhone, etc. The fourth thing is your session cookie. Once you successfully pass I am who I said I am. I'm logging in from an allowed location. I have authenticated via MFA. Then M365 in this case provides you effectively with a representation of your authorization and access in the form of a session cookie. And last and definitely not least is your source IP. Where do you log in from? This is typically, once again, pretty static. I log in from work. I log in from home. The end. Potentially, I log in from my mobile device. That is also finite. How often do you switch from Verizon to AT&T to again, potentially 3 standardized sources of authentication? Those things make you you. Those things identify Patterson cake. Those are effectively identity and access and user behavior, which we'll talk a little bit more about in just a minute. Back to our expose. What happens next? User clicks the link, presented with a very nice login page based on Allure, man-in-the-middle proxy. Naturally, they put in their credential. Why wouldn't they? They believe in the validity of this process. They occasionally have to log in real life for valid reasons, so away we go. Put in the email address for the username component. The snippet in the middle is EvilJinx capturing that process. You will notice this is the beginning of the user agent string. You can see that just, do I have a pen? Right in here. At this point, the threat actors are gathering all the components of my identity. They're gathering all the components that make me me in M365. We're about to give them my username. They've gathered my user agent string. They've gathered my source IP address. And sadly, again, the next step of the foray is the user enters their password. This is all being proxied, meaning that EvilJinx is receiving this information and then passing it on to the real M365. Looks like this on the back end, again, for EvilJinx in particular. Evil proxy captures user agent string, which we see here, source IP, then we have username, and we have password in plain text. So we've got 3, 4 of the major components of identity that make me me. EvilJinx, again, is receiving that from the end user, passing it to M365, and then relaying the response as appropriate back to the user, as we'll see momentarily. But we have MFA. I hear this all the time. Almost every time I get a business email compromise inquiry, we need help. We can't imagine how this happened. We have MFA. Sorry. Useful, important. It is your due diligence. Do not throw MFA out the window, please. If you're working on an MFA implementation, continue with that implementation. Not trying to dissuade you from that. However, typical MFA can be easily proxied as per this scenario. And so what happens next is that EvilJinx, the evil man in the middle, the threat actor, has all the components of my identity, passes those components to Microsoft. Microsoft says, I'm going to need you to complete an MFA prompt. We dutifully pass that directly back to the end user. As per the screenshot, end user says, well, yeah, MFA, we're secure. Put in number, put in code, approve, deny, doesn't matter. SMS, sorry, all the same thing. This is effectively a legitimate MFA prompt. Evil proxy then passes that back to M365. M365 says, you are clearly who you said you are. Here is your session cookie. And then the evil proxy says, bye, and redirects in this scenario to the actual login page. So the end user ends up here ultimately, and they're probably confused. They probably log in again. They just access their actual inbox and they're like, I don't understand what just happened. If they're a typical user, they're probably going to go through this whole process all over again. They're so convinced they needed this message, that this was trusted, it was worthwhile. They're going to go back and do it all over again often. I feel their pain, to be frank. On the back end, once again, I have all the things. I have all the components, A, B, C, D, E, of this user's identity, from User agent string, device, browser, OS indicators to username to password to MFA session cookie. And how long, anybody know how long an MFA session cookie lasts? Effectively, it has a built-in refresh component. And the browser, once I inject this cookie into my browser, I can refresh this over and over and over, and it lasts, I don't know, it's hard to specify exactly because Microsoft's a little coy about it, but effectively forever, long time. For all intents and purposes, it's, again, this identity is completely owned. This is ugly, but this is the actual cookie down here. So if I'm a clever threat actor, I have all the components of the identity for this end user. Now, all of these, frankly, are really easy to now mimic and manipulate with one exception, and that is the source IP. And we're going to come back to that repeatedly because it's critical. This may be the most valid indicator of this process that we can derive and or investigate because it's highly unlikely that the threat actor is going to log into M365 from my house. I really hope not. My second thought, actually, that would be kind of refreshing. Then we could just duke it out. In any case, if I'm a clever threat actor, and this is a big if, I can mimic the user almost exactly from an M365 perspective, almost exactly. Now, it won't surprise you that this is a game of cat and mouse, right? We see this all the time. The harder we make it for the threat actors, the harder they work. And so we're seeing them work a little harder at this. For a while, they would get username, password, session cookie, and they'd log in from the Ukraine. And we went, oh, crud, we can implement conditional access policies and stop anyone from logging in from the Ukraine or Russia, or again, depending on where you are geographically located, we can do geo-blocking and stop that from happening. Well, it took the threat actors about 3.5 minutes to shift all their traffic to US East 1, aka Virginia. They've worked their way around that, and now we're seeing them through the use often of VPN solutions to become geographically closely located to the source. So I'm in Colorado. Chances are they're not logging in from my house, but it would not be inconceivable that they would switch to a source IP somewhere in US West, for example, to get around geo-blocking. Step number 8, if I'm the threat actor, I got all the things. I got the username, I got the password, user agent string, et cetera, et cetera. This is me actually just literally copying and pasting the cookie, using a Firefox cookie plugin, aka cookie editor, and it is this stupid simple. Copy, paste, import into session, hit enter, and here we go. Threat actor has just become me for all intents and purposes from an M365 perspective. And I need you to stop and think. In the context of your environment, if I have your username, your M365 integrated, your Intra integrated, potentially your Active Directory on-prem integrated username and password, what else can I do with that? What else can I do with that? I don't know. But client access VPN, critical. Other SaaS applications, the list grows on and on and on, and absolutely positively, I have SharePoint access and OneDrive and Teams and the M365 ecosystem. Bad day. The next things that happen. If I'm a clever threat actor, this is actual threat actor hands-on keyboard at this point. They didn't just automatically acquire the session. They didn't automatically test authentication. Now we have an actual evil individual interacting generally through web portal for this M365 account. And so one of the things that threat actors immediately do is add a sign-in method. That way, if you find them and or if the MFA session cookie ultimately expires, which it will someday, I'm going to go ahead and add myself, add my tertiary device, secondary device, whatever, so that I can actually MFA directly. And if you've seen the MFA prompt, which you have, and you didn't have your phone with you and you had a secondary or tertiary device, you can click under the MFA prompt. I don't have my phone with me right now. Can you send it to my email or SMS or whatever? And this is a persistence mechanism that effectively obviates the MFA session cookie and allows long-standing access until we find it and revoke it for the threat actor. The threat actors are almost done, if you will. Step number 11. This is where things get interesting and probably expensive. What we see the threat actors doing now is, they're safe, they're sound, they have a persistence mechanism. They can spend a little time enumerating the mailbox, SharePoint, OneDrive. They will often do keyword searches, credit cards, passwords, socials, etc. More often than not, ultimately, they're looking for a financial conversation that's already in existence. They're looking for an ongoing financial conversation that they can inject themselves into to redirect funds. Remember, for all intents and purposes, if this was my mailbox, they are me. They are me. So they're going to pay attention for often a week or two. Typical time frames are about 2 weeks. The next thing they're going to do is impersonate the user. They are me right now. And so they will then inject themselves into a conversation related to payroll, invoice payments, payroll, and invoice payments, almost invariably. They're going to find a conversation, an ongoing conversation with an external vendor that trusts me. Here we go again. And they're going to say, shoot, this invoice is outstanding. We're reaching end of year. We need this paid as quickly as possible. And we've changed banks. So sorry for the inconvenience. Here's my new ACH routing information. They are going to create an inbox rule, almost invariably, to redirect inbound mail from that external vendor to a hidden directory in the inbox, a directory that already exists. RSS feeds is a favorite. So again, I'm going, as a threat actor, pretend to be me. I'm going to say, I need you to pay this invoice. I'm going to send it to the vendor. When the vendor responds with, well, okay, thank you very much, I'm going to hide that mail message via inbox rule in RSS feeds or something similar, so the actual me never sees it. And I'm going to have this entire conversation redirecting payment 1, 2, 3, 1 invoice, 2 invoice, 1.6 million, 4.5 million. The last major case of work, $4.5 million left the organization based on this strategy. They were doing a big construction project. They impersonated the general contractor, and $4.5 million later, ouch. The next thing they're going to do is pilfer the inbox. They're going to look for all the trusted relationships they can possibly exploit. Who do you do business with? Who would trust an email from you? And then unfortunately, this cycle propagates, repeats. We're going to take this mailbox, we're going to pivot to 3 other businesses, 10 other businesses, so on and so on. And we get exponential growth and exponential financial prosperity for the threat actor with very little effort. Really, all they've done is manipulate the user at this point. An important option item that we'll talk just about a little bit about in a minute, and that's enterprise application registration. I don't really have time to deep dive into this, but I'll talk to you a little bit about the indicators. If you have the default configuration in Intra Azure AD user settings, which I'll show you at the end of the slides, you allow users to register applications to enhance the functionality of their M365 experience. What we're seeing is that the threat actors are now taking advantage of this to use things like mailbox search tools, or again, they register this application, we find them, we evict them, we don't nuke the application, and it remains an alternate persistence mechanism. Again, last 2 just described. Impersonate you, not only to the initial vendor, to every vendor, every person that they can find, rinse, wash, repeat, and the cycle continues. That's the story. That's the SOP. That's what we're seeing every day. And I never want to minimize the impact, but when I have a customer call and say, we've had a BEC, I want to tell you what happened. And I really want to say, stop, let me tell you what happened. And invariably it follows this same sequence of events, a little bit of variation, a little bit of change. Don't want to become lax, lazy, but that is what's happening. So I want to talk about detect, prevent opportunities ever so quickly, halfway at a time. I'm going to correlate these with the previous steps. So when I say number 3, this is number 3 in correlation with what the threat actors have done already. So users click the link, the user's prepared to log into a bogus page. Here's a few things that we can do about it. detect, prevent opportunities. We can and should, if possible, block this URL, right? Login.haventac.com is not legitimate. It exists, but it is not a valid email authentication, an authentication endpoint for Azure Intra. It is possible, and I don't know how sophisticated your URL filtering is, but it is possible, seems really possible and doable to me, that if you ever see the remaining URL string, so this right here, if you see this portion of the string associated with any URL, with any domain other than microsoftonline.com, maybe you could block that. That's at least an opportunity. If you can't block that, then this is a tremendous investigative opportunity to go back through end-user browser history and look for what? Look for that string associated with anything other than login.microsoftonline.com, and that's a pretty significant indicator. There's a question about conditional access. I mentioned geo-blocking. If you're unfamiliar with conditional access, it is a security component of Intra. You have to have an actual Intra license to use conditional access, but conditional access allows you to define criteria for access, oddly enough. And geo-blocking is not tremendously valuable, but it is sort of your due diligence again. You can stop authentication from occurring from outside of geographical regions in which you don't do business. So that's a possibility. The challenge here, and what I'm trying to illustrate on this slide, is that this is always a problem. The customer wants to know in the midst of active incident response investigation, tell me exactly when this first part happened. And I say, I can't. First, malicious authentication occurred at 7:12 p.m. UTC. Do you see the 7:12 log stamp, date and timestamp for Intra sign-ins there at 7:12? You see it? Yeah, me neither. Me neither. This is challenging. This is really frustrating, honestly. But there you go. We'll look at some other mechanisms, but that's why we're at step number 3. And unfortunately, we're going to jump to step number 9. A whole bunch of stuff happens in the middle, and we have very limited visibility into that process, which is brutal. And I'll talk to you about the visibility resources momentarily, but from an M365 perspective, we don't get to see a lot of this, which is too bad. We've leaped all the way to step number 9, and now we're beginning to see the actual authentication occurring in the context of the owned account. Excuse me. Clever threat actor, once again, at this point, how do we identify that this is the real Patterson cake or the owned Patterson cake? And we have limited clue. If the threat actor is on top of their game, they have my username and password, they can mimic my device browser. They don't often do that. They don't often do that. They could, but it costs them money. Most threat actors aren't using a Windows 11 professional enterprise and a defined browser that's managed, et cetera. That would cost money. So chances are they're not going to do that. So that can also be a clue, thus the blue arrow. MFA device, they can mimic that. They just stole a session cookie. They don't care. They have the session cookie. It's hard for us to do any identification or control of the session cookie, frankly. And of course, last but definitely not least, the source IP, again, in terms of detect, prevent opportunities. And sincerely, stare at this for just a second. I hope you can read that a little bit. Stare at this for just a second, and do you see anything out of the ordinary? And sometimes I feel a little ashamed of the potential ease in which we go, what looks wrong here? Now, yeah, we're nerds. We're proud of it, but how often does the average user go, I decided to switch to Linux today? Yeah, Scotty Scripps is like, I'm on it. There it is. This is not rocket surgery, as I like to say. They switched browser, they switched operating system, and bam. And now we have at least 3 significant indicators. We have geographical region associated with IP address. We have user agent string, which indicates OS and browser, and we're on to something. This is our first glaring indicator. Okay, whoa, something is wrong. What you'll see here, and this is not discrete. This is not discrete, I'm sorry. This happens frequently, but this is a telltale sign of the proxied MFA auth and then session cookie theft, the interrupted followed by success. That is not, again, if you see that, don't freak out. That will happen frequently in normal authenticated sessions for a user. At the same time, it is an indicator that something may have happened. And so we're looking right there for changes in user behavior analytics effectively. Excuse me. Sort of our next major detect prevent opportunity is if you see the threat actor based on the previous indicators, we are going to just hone in on these like laser focused. And I almost forgot, I did forget. This is this right here. This is potentially the most critical indicator of the entire expose so far, date and timestamp, because we're going to need to know when first unauthorized authentication occurred. And then we're going to need to time box it. And we're going to focus on these indicators, the IP address, the user agent string, the geographical region, and we're going to use those to identify the real me from the fake me. And we're going to pay particular attention because we now know how the threat actors are going to behave. Chances are they're going to pivot to manage my account through my profile and my sign-ins, and they're going to add an additional authentication mechanism. This is me adding my Google Voice number as an alternate mechanism for authentication in this account. We want to find this, and of course, we want to remove it from the user's account when we do. Frankly, these are your primary detect prevent opportunities. I wish the list were a little longer, but the fact is, if we can derive this information, and if we can drive this information in a date timestamp, sort of a time box window, then we can move from there to identifying all of the behaviors that were not the real Patterson cake. They were the owned Patterson cake. Once we do this, I strongly suggest that you cast a wider net. Right now, we're focusing on me. I clicked the link. I gave up my creds. Please don't fire me. Did anybody else succumb to this? Chances are I'm not the only person who got the initial email message. So once I derive these indicators, I'm going to back up and I'm going to look at our entire M365 environment and make sure that no one else fell prey to this particular campaign. I want to talk about some investigative components and then tie up really quickly with a couple preventive things. Investigative components, meaning, how are we going to dig into this and find out exactly what happened? And we have effectively a pretty finite list of resources. These are the resources that we have for investigating in the context of M365. It's possible you have a third-party logging solution or you're piping your data to SIM. Doesn't really matter. These are the sources of truth, even if they exist someplace else. We have identity sign-in logs. These are solid gold. These are the first thing that I want to extract. I want to export these immediately upon any suspicion. And that's because they're generally short-lived. If you have a lower level license, you probably only get these for 7 days. If you have a higher level license in E3, E5, you get it for 30 days, which is still not very long. So I'm going to go to enter identity sign-in logs. I'm going to export all of these. I'm going to export them generally in CSV and JSON format. And I'm going to be careful to, oh man, I wonder if I can find this really quickly. Should have had this staged. Forgive me. Let's do it. Okay, really quickly. This is unplanned, but you need to know. Here I am. Let's go to all users. Let's go to sign-in logs. Don't pick. This is my family tenant, so be nice to me. Here I am in sign-in logs. This is my first stop. I'm going to go here. I'm probably going to start UAL export, and then I'm going to go here. Couple really important things. I want this, but the first thing I want to do is go to columns, and you see all the columns that are not selected yet. Select them all, please. I want all this information, and I don't get it by default. So security risky sign-ins doesn't matter. All user sign-ins ends up in the same place. Columns, choose all the columns, download. I want to download all of these. Interactive sign-ins are most important to me. Non-interactive sign-ins secondarily. Can also do audit logs, same exact scenario. Make sure you select all the available data. Look, I don't get user agent by default. Lame. Check all the boxes, download all the files. Even if you don't look at these right now, keep them because, again, you probably have 7 to 30 days to accomplish this step. The next piece is M365 UAL. I'm going to give you a resource at the end, so don't panic. That actually has more information on how to get to this. This is theoretically all the logs you'll ever need, except for the ones that aren't included. and the level of detail. So this is important. This is longer standing. You probably have this for about a year. The next thing is exchange. Specific mail, message trace, mailbox activities. I care less about these, to be honest, at this moment in history. Mostly I want to see sign-ins, I want to see UAL, I want to see workload access. And what I mean by that, so UAL quantifies all the components of M365 as a workload, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, Exchange. So I'm going to focus my investigation right here. Once I get to this point, we are going to probably have to do a deep dive into the mailbox. Message trace will help us. Invariably, I want to know who did the threat actor interact with? What did they do from a malicious perspective? What email message it is? As I mentioned, this is a particularly useful clue, and it is almost always a component of BEC at the moment, and that is inbox rule creation. The cool thing about this is that if you dig into this, this is a UAL export in JSON, unified audit log from M365, and it includes mailbox activities. And the cool thing about this is, because we've identified some indicators of where this happened, when it happened, now we have a tremendous clue about the domains, the businesses that the threat actor interacted with. In my example here, clearly they were trying to hide mail from somedomain.com. So this gives me a beautiful pivot to dig deeper into somedomain.com in terms of what did I send? I probably need to reach out to them sooner rather than later, find out if there have been financial transactions, et cetera, et cetera. Significantly important, tremendous clue. The business wants to know, they will always want to know, tell me everything that they did, everywhere they went, all the information that they access, and then the UAL is your friend. Unified audit log is your friend. We can look at SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, et cetera, et cetera. Again, no panic. I'll show you a resource and I'll walk through at the end. Or you can come back on Friday. Is my workshop on Friday? I think so. And we're actually going to step through this process. Enterprise applications. This is a little bit of a new one. This is, okay, I got into your mailbox, I've pilfered, I made an inbox rule, I'm engaging in transactions, I want some extended functionality and or I want persistence, so I'm going to install an app in the context of Patterson Cake's account. This is new and different. You might not notice it. What's super important about this is that it does not necessarily occur in the context of my user account. Oh, bummer. We will often see this associated with infrastructure, M365 infrastructure. And if you're just looking for, if you're filtering on Patterson Cake activities, you might miss this. You might miss this. So my suggestion to you is, remember, we have a date and timestamp. So I'm going to look at all enterprise application registrations in the context of this tenant, in the context of the date timestamp. There should be very few. There might be none. But usually this is pretty infrequent. And so in this case, you can see I've registered the EM client application, which is legitimate. It is an application that allows me to synchronize the entire contents of my mailbox someplace else. So threat actor effectively got the entire mailbox in this scenario, which is a bummer, especially if you have a typical mailbox, which contains 150,000 mail messages like everybody else. This is the technical term, consent to application. This is the technical component that we want to look for in the UAL. Did this happen? Did the threat actor register an application in the context of this unauthorized activity? And this is what I want to see. Oh, well, maybe it's not what I want to see, but this is what I want to ensure happened or didn't happen. And technically, the logged component is consent to application. So you want to pay careful attention to that again within the date and time parameters of this incident, not necessarily focus specifically on my account, but date timestamp. And then it doesn't take a great deal of effort to correlate this back to, is this a legitimate application? Should it have happened? Yes, no. And of course, if no, then we're going to want to nuke it. You're going to want to remove this application. Impersonating the user, this is often final stage. Actions on objective are probably done. They probably already stole some of your money. And now they're going to pivot to sort of the Hail Mary of who else can we phish using your account. And this, once again, is more your due diligence to go back to the UAL and to the mailbox audit logs to say, but besides some domain, who did the threat actors interact with as Patterson cake? And this is tough. This is a hard conversation to reach out to your customers, your business associates, et cetera, and say, we've been phished. But it would be my strong admonition to you that if you are in a position to have this conversation, figure out how you're going to manage this now before it ever happens. Hopefully it never happens, but at least have an internal discussion on how are we going to handle notifications, who's responsible, what kind of phraseology are we going to put in there, et cetera, et cetera. This is a rough one. Don't like it. Okay, we're almost done. Deep breath. I've got an alerting, I've got a hardening, and then I've got a couple super useful end user educational slides. We'll see. This is huge. This is huge. Hearken to the sound of my voice. You have built-in user behavior analytics in Intra. It's called risky sign-ins, risky user behaviors, etc., as highlighted per this slide. I'm in the Intra admin console here. I'm under Protection and Security Center, and you'll see I'm looking at risky users, risky workloads, risky sign-ins. This is solid gold. Now, it's intermingled with a bunch of lead and coal, but there is solid gold in there. And unfortunately, what I see in most enterprises is this is noisy and prone to false positive, and so everybody ignores it. My secret weapon, I guess not so secret anymore. You call me tomorrow and you say, business email compromise, and inside I want to say, let me tell you what happened, but I don't do that because I don't want to minimize the severity of your situation. And you say, well, here's what happened. We engage, I get into your console, I start exporting the UL, and then I pivot to Intra sign-ins and I check risky sign-ins, and almost invariably, there's an indication of exactly what happened right here in the logs, and you didn't know, and you didn't look, and you weren't paying attention. One additional component. You will notice this is evil right here. Do you see the status? This is important. This is super important. What happens is the customer calls, bad things happen, BEC, Patterson cake, clicked a link. I say, often first and foremost, did you revoke all authenticated sessions? Yes, we did. Did you reset the password? Yes, we did. Okay, sweet. Good place to start. Now we can begin our investigation. What happens when they reset the password is that it Intra automatically adjusts the risky sign-in detection to remediated and or dismissed. And so this now vanishes from the default console when you're viewing these alerts. These are not displayed by default. You find out something bad happens, you reset the password, you go look at these, there's nothing there. Bummer. You can see, you can choose to view. Can I do this really quickly? Sorry. Let's try. Security Center, risky sign-ins. Check these out. Risk state. You don't get to see those. It's that simple. Risk state, check these boxes. Yes, please. Sign-in type, all checked. That will now display the events that we're looking at. If you don't have those by default, you won't see them. You won't even know they're there. I feel like I'm cheating when I look at those, but there you go. Pay attention to these. You can do active alerting. Somebody's probably receiving these alerts in their inbox. And again, probably 9 out of 10, maybe 19 out of 20 are not useful, but you need to pay attention to these. These can be a tremendous indicator at near the outset of potential exploitation. Almost out of time. Hardening. This is stupid simple. Stupid simple. The box on the left, I am in Intra user settings. The box on the left represents M365 defaults. Effectively, you don't even have to look at this. Just remember this. Go to this and change all of the defaults. Toggle every single one of them to the alternate solution. It's ridiculous. Thanks, M365 Microsoft. Do you want users to register applications? Well, no, I do not. Do you want to restrict non-admin users from creating tenants? That sounds like a really good idea. Yes, yes, please. Do you want users to be able to create security groups? No, no, please. You get the idea. Stare at this slide. I'll share the deck with you. You're just going to basically talk. These are just common sense. You look at them and you go, how could that possibly be the default? Do you think it's a good idea to restrict access to the Intra admin center for non-admin users? I think that would be good. So check this out. And the really good news about this, do not ignore change management. Do not ignore standard procedure in your environment, but these have zero impact. You can go toggle these probably middle of the day today, and nobody knows, nobody cares. And you reasonably significantly improve your intra-security by going click, 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 the end. Again, don't do that without some review and caution, but for the vast majority of enterprises, I'll have this conversation post BEC, and usually whoever I'm talking to says, stop, stop, stop. I'm pulling up the admin console now and making those changes. Sweet. I want to have a slide. I want to have the next slide say silver bullets to keep this from happening. And to the best of my knowledge, there really aren't any. There are a couple components that are important. Unfortunately, you're not going to like this one, but unfortunately, I think the most critical component is the HI component, the human intelligence. Good old HI to the rescue. We have to help our users understand how this is happening, and not from a super minutia technical perspective. I have some suggestions momentarily. The other is that there are capabilities. FIDO compliant MFA solutions do some basic, sort of browser certificate pinning kind of a thing. That's not accurate, but the same kind of idea to the session cookie, so that the session cookie can't be stolen and used elsewhere. Moving to FIDO hardware MFA tokens is hard. It's a huge, heavy lift, and probably most enterprises aren't going to do it. Stay tuned. Microsoft is working on components, conditional access components, etc. For right now, the due diligence things that we mentioned, the blocking of URLs, the educating your end user staff, etc., are kind of your best bets. And then being on high alert, being vigilant, paying attention to these components so you can at least stop this before it goes too far. And then I want to make the user smarter. This is hard, and I'm not picking on the users. I'm a user. But I have some quick ideas, and probably they're not magical in any way, shape, or form. But I really want to say three things to the user. I want to implant the idea, as per the opening slide, that electronic communications are not trustworthy anymore. They haven't been for a long time, but we don't need to go there. If you're old like me and you long for the days of classic Pizza Hut, you probably remember when, for a while, you'd get a phone call, and the phone call would be from your bank, and they'd ask you to give them your credit card or your social security number, and you'd do it because you trusted in the integrity of the phone system. Kind of inconceivable at this moment in history. And that is because we beat it into everyone's heads repeatedly. You cannot trust. How do you know who you're talking to? Mistrust but verify. If your bank calls, I really doubt that the average user is going to say, oh, here's my social. So I want to start just incorporating into my conversations with the users. I'm not so much into don't click the link, don't do this, don't do that. I just want to say, stop, think it through. Think it through. Electronic communications are not inherently trustworthy, period. And then I want to say to them, would you give your social security number away? Would you give your credit card number away? No, they wouldn't. They know the value. Okay, then add to the list your password. You do not need to authenticate for, when it pertains to email, almost ever. And if you do, stop, pause, review, talk to IT, whatever. Again, just the simple components. Electronic communications are not trustworthy. And the most important three data elements in your life are your social, your credit card, and your password. Last and definitely not least, multi-factor all the things. Define thresholds in your environment for critical decisions, specifically when it comes to financial transactions. Probably don't need to multi-factor a $10 transaction. Maybe you do, $500. Can you believe that $4.5 million transactions occur via a singular email for a singular individual in any environment? That should not happen. Stop that from happening. Do something from a workflow perspective to make this much less possible, much more difficult. Define thresholds in advance, and maybe we've got a fighting chance of at least preventing huge financial fraud. Okay, last slide. We made it. Extra stuff. Let me show you really quickly because I hope this is useful. This is GitHub repo, github.com/secure-cake. And if you go to M365 BEC resources, I made a list. And I have a script for you for interacting with and extracting the unified audit log. I'm a huge fan of SOPs, so I have a link to SOPs. I have written workflow instructions in 3 blog posts on the Black Hills InfoSec blog that allow you to tie all of this together. And this legitimately gives you a technical workflow for extracting the UAL, pulling it into SOPs, and conducting the investigations that we just talked about. In addition to that, if you go to this miscellaneous, wasn't sure how else to do this. So what I did is just conglomerate a bunch of queries. This is me interacting with an M365 tenant through PowerShell. This is not API. It does not require a bunch of advanced configuration. It just requires permissions. What permissions? You're welcome. They're all right here. Specifically delineated. You can look at that later. And this, again, is just me saying, here's a bunch of things I might want to know categorically with some comments about how do I ask questions of the UAL to figure out what happened, what the threat actor did, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In all sincerity, we're doing a workshop on Friday, a pay what you can workshop, and we're going to step through this as a lab to go through our demo scenario, pull the UAL, investigate in SOPs, et cetera. If I don't know you, if you don't know me, then jot this stuff down. I want to be friends. Anything I can do to help you here, I'm happy to do so. You have a question about the repo, about the blog post, whatever, talk to me. Find me, reach out to me on Discord, email, whatever. I like for this to be the beginning of the conversation as opposed to the end. Although now it's the end.
It's the end. Oh no!
I went like 2 minutes over. That's better than I thought I was going to do, to be honest.
Oh no, you have it. You have until your time. You know, you're good.
Okay, all right.
You have all these links that you include there. I just made a playlist for you the other day on the Anti-Siphon YouTube.
Nice.
Wanted to pull that up real quick.
I heard you talking about classic Pizza Hut.
I'll find that. I'll find that.
You implanted the idea. Now I'm hungry.
I know. We got to the backstage. I told Zach, I was like, so I straight up want some Pizza Hut today for lunch.
So true. So true.
Cool. So I wanted to put the link in the Discord for the playlist that I had for you there. I'll have to add this into that playlist now too once we're done. Awesome. Well, cool,
so
man.
Patterson, you were talking about FIDO keys. I just want to grab them while I got you here real quick. Do you recommend a specific FIDO device that seems to be the most useful, convenient, whatever?
That is a fantastic question. And, well, we started this webcast with transparency, so we probably should end with transparency. It has been a long time since I had any direct responsibility for FIDO key implementation. And I'm talking back in, RSA days, RSA fobs. And so I don't really know. I don't have firsthand experience. I'd welcome input, obviously, from the audience, because I have not been responsible for implementing or managing that. And again, to be frank, every enterprise customer that I've had this conversation with, one of two things come out of that conversation. One, we're not going there, or two, we're working on that initiative. And I'm still waiting for someone to say, we already did that, or we have a fantastic solution. So yeah, sorry.
It's a good answer. It's a good answer, right? Like there's a lot of options out there, and maybe it's very subjective. Maybe this is the right FIDO solution for you and not for everybody else. It's a one fits one kind of solution. So very cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you for taking the time with today to share your knowledge with everybody, man. I just looking at the Discord, everybody's just loving what you presented today, which I knew that they would love it. You're a fantastic instructor and presenter, man. So we do appreciate it.
Thank you. Someday I will advance to the ability to actually be able to pay attention to the Discord while I'm teaching, but that's not today.
Yeah, that's a talent. It takes a lot of practice for sure. Definitely. Do you have some time for a few questions?
Heck yeah.
Awesome. Cool. So this question came back about halfway through, but they were asking, does sign-in frequency not break the MFA token? I don't know if that rings a bell to a point in your slide.
So some of that is manageable, and some of it's configurable, and some of it's not. And we have the typical conundrum, which is you can actually force the users to have to re-authenticate every 2.5 minutes, right? I mean, and then you get fired. So it's that tug of war and finding the right balance between, think about it, just simplistically think about how often are you presented with an MFA prompt for authentication to your M365 environment, whether it's Outlook or whether it's webmail on your phone. Think about that for your specific environment, and then think about could you minimize that? Would it disrupt end user behaviors to a point where again you'd lose your job? It's a real cat and mouse give and take, and I'm not sure the right answer for your environment, but it is something. I think it's a valid security control for you to stare at and think, how do we manage this? How do we strike the right balance between making the threat actors' lives difficult and I am tangentially a huge fan of conditional access policies and trusted network locations. If you can define those for your business, you get all sorts of leverage for bifurcating. You're outside of the org. Sorry, things are going to be more complicated. That's just the price of doing business. You're inside the org, sweet. And whether that's behind a VPN address range or an actual enterprise IP address range, or grapple with that a little bit. That is a built-in component of conditional access that I think is worth looking at for sure. Great question.
I could not imagine being prompted every 2.5 minutes or whatever you said. My gosh.
Patterson speaking from experience. I remember when I was a young admin, I one time said, let's turn the wick up on these things and see what happens.
Gosh,
yeah, I've made one or two mistakes with conditional access policies, to be honest. But yeah.
Yeah, so that brought back like a trauma memory for me. Not that it was MFA related, but I was working at a hospital at a time, and we had to send an alert out to all of our staff about one of our systems being down, and it was supposed to just have the alert pop up in 15 minutes. And instead of having the alert pop up in 15 minutes, it showed the alert for 15 minutes, and it was one that you couldn't close or move away. I don't know why I just thought of that, but gosh, that was quite the day.
Learning opportunities right there.
It was for sure.
For me, it was when I said, let me take all these production servers and stick them in the wrong WSUS update group. And they rebooted during the day. And then I got a phone call. I was like, hey, could you come in here real quick? I was like, yeah, what's up? They're like, so fun times, all the servers rebooted. I was like, oh no. Yeah, so we had a good conversation about that. I remember it ending with like this: I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I guarantee it will never happen again.
Yeah, that was the same conversation I had.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sounds familiar.
Jake has this question. Do you have any other good IOCs we should be tracking in general, other than unknown device, anonymous IP, outdated browser, tracking and alerting on?
So if I were going to give you two of the most high fidelity indicators that we're seeing right now, number one is inbox rule creation, period. And I say that specifically because the most common name for threat actor created inbox rules is a period. What human being makes an inbox rule named period? Nobody. So one of the most high fidelity alerts that we implement right now for our customers is short named, I mean like 2, 3, 4 character random named inbox rule creations. They are almost always an indication of a compromised mailbox. Not unequivocally, but almost always. So that is huge. And if you can do that, if you're piping your UAL data to your SIM or something, you need to implement that rule and you need to do it right away. The next less clear one is a handful of user agent strings. How many of your users are using the Yandex browser?
All of them.
I mean, you never know. If you do business in Russia, then possibly that's not a good indicator. But for most enterprises, most US-based enterprises, Yandex is not commonly in use. Yandex, Python, man, I just forgot the third one that we saw a couple of weeks ago. But better solution. Go to your intra, export your sign-ins, export the user agent string list, sort and filter, and look for weird, look for normal. Define what your business looks like. Do you use a standardized browser? Probably you use Edge, Chrome, maybe Firefox. And then it's a pretty tremendous potential opportunity to look for other UAL strings that fall outside of normal. Again, for better or for worse, there's going to be some variability there, but those are the two big ones. Yeah, geolocation, IP address. I wanted to mention, and I forgot because too much content. When you find an IP address, you find evil IP 44.12.37.24. I made that up, by the way. The next thing you want to do is pivot to the ASN. What is the ASN for that? That is the overarching designator for that ISP. Threat actors are just like you and I. They probably have a singular ISP. So if you can look at ASN, which is included in many of your UAL logs, and or you can reference that, pivot and look for that ASN elsewhere in your environment, because that may be a totally disparate IP address space, but it'll still have the same ASN, and the threat actors hang out in those spaces. That's also an incredible clue in your investigation. Great question.
Have you seen any successful bypasses of FIDO2 keys for M365 or in general, other than physical access?
I have not responded to or investigated any FIDO key bypass events. Yeah, again, that's my personal limited experience, but no. And you know, once again, here we are, cat and game. Cat and game. I just made up a phraseology. So this is a cat and game mouse. Let's make it harder for the threat actors. I won't be shocked at all if we all move to FIDO keys tomorrow. They'll find a way around it, right? I mean, that's just where we are. But you can be one step ahead if you move there before everybody else. Yeah, yeah. It's the old analogy of the two people in the woods, and the bear's chasing the two people, and one stops and puts on running shoes, and the other says, "You can't outrun the bear." And they say, "I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun you." Tremendous cybersecurity parallels. Be less attractive. Be a less attractive target than everybody else by moving to FIDO tokens first. Easy for me to say.
Awesome. All right, we got time for probably a few more questions here. There was one I just had pulled up. Have you seen any success? Oh no, that was the one I just read. Sorry, that was this one. Oh, do you know if Entra can be configured to require an MFA challenge to add, delete, modify MFA authentication methods?
Boy, that's a fantastic question. I can't remember. I don't know.
Fair.
I don't know. I love that thought. And it seems like there is a component that can enforce that at the MFA registration piece, but I can't remember off the top of my head. So fantastic question. Stop asking such hard questions.
Stump the instructor. I love it. This person, Nerf, is asking, I know what Windows Hello for Business is FIDO. Any appreciable difference between it and FIDO2 key, like a UB key?
The answer is, once again, I honestly don't have enough tactical, tangible experience with pros and cons and differentiation there. I think that they're generally on par. You know, again, the challenges of deployment and management and I don't know, and I'm frankly grateful that I don't have to wrestle with those things. So I think the overarching solutions are pretty close to on par. You know, how you go about implementing and managing them is a huge question mark in my mind. Like I said, that not in my purview, thankfully.
Yeah, all right. No problem, man. All right, man. I appreciate it. You again coming here, joining us, sharing your knowledge with us as always. You have your workshop coming up this Friday. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that before we get kicked off to our breakout room?
Absolutely, yeah. So, you know, for better or for worse, we're going to go through this context again. I have built a business email compromise scenario through great effort in a tenant to mimic all the things that we just talked about. And then I've exported the UAL, I've created a SoftElk VM for you, and I've created a couple labs where we'll go through this conversation. We'll go through a little more technical specificity on the detection and investigation, and then we'll culminate that in an actual hands-on lab using SoftElk, using the SoftElk user interface to investigate UAL and pull out the important components of a business email compromise. And this is legitimate IR workflow. This is how I do part of my job. This is not just an expose into, hey, here's a cool tool. This is legitimately a workflow process that we use to rapidly investigate business email compromise, and I want to share it with you.
Awesome. Thank you, man. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm excited for it. I will be there to join you.
Awesome.
And join everybody else. Again, we just put a link in the Discord for your workshop. So if you guys are interested, definitely come and check that out. Patterson, man, thank you again for being here with us. Appreciate your time. Wonderful. If you guys are sticking around for our breakout room, we're going to be opening up that room here in just a second. That's if you have your Zoom application installed on your device. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a little button that says breakout rooms, and there'll be a section there for AMA. You can join Daniel and I. We'll be in there to try to answer all the questions that you might have. Patterson, if you have time, you're more than welcome to join us as well. But until next week, we will have, let's see, Tim Medine next week. So we'll see you then, and hope you all have a great day. Take care, everybody, and see you in the breakout room, or see you next week.